I'm a locksmith who survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion, and this is my story. Before I begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. It was 2:34 a.m. when it happened. I remember checking my watch as the first call came in. Just another late-night emergency lockout, or so I thought. 20 years as a locksmith in Greenfield had taught me that nothing good happens after midnight, but that night redefined bad in ways I never imagined. My name is Marcus Reed, owner of Reed's Lock and Key. I'd built my reputation on being available 24/7 for emergencies. That dedication was about to be tested beyond anything I could have prepared for. The call came from Dr. Eleanor Vega at the Greenfield Research Institute. Her voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of panic that immediately put me on edge. "Mr. Reed, we have an emergency situation. Several secure doors in our facility have malfunctioned. We need someone immediately." It was unusual. Their facility had state-of-the-art electronic security systems that I'd helped install, but rarely needed to service. Something about her tone made me grab my most comprehensive kit rather than just the standard emergency tools. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I told her, already moving toward my van. The night was unusually still as I drove across town. No traffic, which wasn't surprising at this hour, but there was something else, a complete absence of the ambient sounds that normally filled even the quietest nights. No distant sirens or highway noise. Nothing but the hum of my engine. I noticed a strange glow on the horizon as I approached the research facility. At first, I thought it might be emergency vehicles, but the light was wrong, a pulsing blue-green that seemed to emanate from the sky itself. The Research Institute was a sprawling complex on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tall fences topped with barbed wire. I'd always assumed they did some kind of government work, but the specifics weren't my business. I punched in my contractor code at the gate, surprised when it worked despite Dr. Vega's claim about system malfunctions. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her waiting at the main entrance, lab coat thrown over what looked like pajamas. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd been awakened from sleep, just like me. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading me inside without the usual pleasantries. "We have a situation in the secure wing." "What kind of malfunction are we looking at?" I asked, following her through the familiar lobby toward the restricted areas. She hesitated, swiping her badge at a security door. "It's complicated. Some doors won't open, others won't close. But more importantly, we need to secure certain areas immediately." The secure wing was in chaos. Researchers in various states of dress hurried between labs, carrying equipment and stacks of documents. Armed security personnel stood at key intersections, far more than I'd ever seen during my daytime visits. "Dr. Vega," I said, stopping in the middle of the corridor, "what's really going on here?" She pulled me into an empty office, closing the door behind us. Through the window, I could see that strange blue-green light flickering more intensely now. "What I'm about to tell you is classified, but given the circumstances..." She took a deep breath. "Approximately 3 hours ago, we detected an anomaly in Earth's orbit. Multiple objects decelerating from speeds that should be impossible. They're not meteors, satellites, or anything we can identify. They're crafts, and they're descending in a controlled manner." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "There wasn't one. You're talking about extraterrestrial vessels," she finished. "We've been tracking them since they passed lunar orbit. Their trajectory indicates multiple landing sites across the globe, including one approximately 20 miles from this facility." My mind struggled to process her words. Aliens. Actual aliens. Coming here. What does this have to do with locks? I managed to ask, my practical side kicking in despite the shock. "We need to secure sensitive materials immediately. Several of our containment vaults have malfunctioned. Whether from some kind of interference from the crafts or simple bad timing, we don't know. But we need those vaults sealed, and we need certain secure areas to remain accessible even if power fails completely." That I understood. That was a problem I could solve. "Show me what needs fixing," I said, hoisting my tool bag. The next hour was a blur of technical challenges, recalibrating biometric scanners, manually overriding electronic locks that had failed in either open or closed positions, installing mechanical backup systems on critical doors. I worked methodically, focusing on the familiar precision of tumblers and pins and cylinders rather than the impossible reality unfolding around me. Dr. Vega accompanied me from room to room, occasionally receiving updates through her earpiece that made her expression grow increasingly grim. While I worked on a particularly stubborn vault lock, she took a call that changed everything. "When?" she asked, her face draining of color. "How many?" A pause. "Understood. Initiate protocol blackout." She turned to me, her professional composure cracking. "They've landed. Multiple crafts, globally, including the one near us. And they're not responding to attempts at communication. Military units that approach the landing site have gone silent." As if to punctuate her words, the building's lights flickered, then stabilized. A moment later, an alarm began to sound, not the sharp wail of a fire or security alert, but a low, pulsing tone that seemed designed not to panic, but to mobilize. "We're initiating full lockdown," she explained. "I need you to finish securing the primary vault, then we'll get you to safety." I completed the job quickly, installing a redundant mechanical lock that would keep the vault secure even if all power failed. As I closed my toolkit, a tremendous boom shook the building, rattling windows and knocking equipment from shelves. "What was that?" I asked, steadying myself against a wall. Dr. Vega's earpiece buzzed with frantic communications. Her face, already pale, went ash white. "They're targeting communications and power infrastructure," she whispered. "That was the substation 3 miles from here. We're switching to emergency generators." The lights flickered again, then dimmed to the dull red glow of emergency lighting. Through the windows, I could see the town had gone dark. Only the strange blue-green illumination on the horizon remained, brighter now, pulsing like a heartbeat. "I need to help with the evacuation," Dr. Vega said. "Follow me to the security office. They'll get you home safely." "Evacuation to where?" I asked, following her through corridors now filled with researchers hurrying in organized but urgent patterns, carrying hard drives, sample cases, and document boxes. "Fallback facilities," she replied without elaborating. "Underground installations designed to survive. Well, designed to survive exactly this type of situation." The security office was a hub of controlled chaos. Monitors showed feeds from around the facility and beyond, the darkened town, the distant glow now clearly emanating from an object that had landed in the hills beyond Greenfield, military vehicles moving on highways, and more ominously, strange shapes moving through the forests surrounding the research complex. Chief of Security David Chun was coordinating personnel with the calm efficiency of someone who had trained for disasters. He glanced up as we entered. "Dr. Vega, Transport Alpha, is ready for the primary research team. Beta and Charlie are 20 minutes out." His eyes shifted to me. "Who's this?" "Marcus Reed, our locksmith. He's secured the vaults, but he needs escort back to town." Chun shook his head. "No civilian transports to town. It's too risky. The visitors have deployed something in urban areas. Fast-moving units targeting infrastructure and population centers." Visitors. Such a benign term for what was clearly an invasion. "I need to get home," I insisted. "My daughter's there with her boyfriend. She's only 19. Dr. Vega and Chun exchanged glances. "Where in town?" Chun asked. "Maple Street, near the high school." He consulted a tablet. "That area hasn't reported any direct contact yet, but it's only a matter of time. We can't spare personnel for civilian evacuation." Seeing my expression, he added, "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. Our protocols are clear." Before I could argue further, the building shook again, harder this time. Several monitors flickered and died. Outside, the night sky lit up with a flash that momentarily outshone the alien glow. "They've hit the military convoy on Highway 16, someone reported. No survivors." Chin made a decision. "Reed, you help secure our sensitive materials. That buys you a seat on Transport Charlie to the fallback facility." "I'm not leaving without my daughter," I said firmly. "Then you're on your own. We can give you a vehicle if you have clearance from Dr. Vega, but that's it." Dr. Vega looked torn, but nodded. "Authorize it." Mr. Reed's assistance was critical. To me, she added, "The roads may not be safe. Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely," I replied, already calculating the fastest route home, wondering if the traffic lights would be functioning, if there would be roadblocks, if the visitors had already reached residential areas. 10 minutes later, I was behind the wheel of a government-issue SUV with reinforced windows and half a tank of gas. Dr. Vega had pressed a satellite phone into my hand before I left. "It operates on frequencies they hopefully haven't compromised yet," she explained. "I've programmed the fallback facility's coordinates. If you can't reach your daughter or the situation becomes untenable, head there." The passcode is Fibonacci 9-1-1. The drive into town was surreal. Greenfield had transformed from sleepy small city to darkened war zone in just a few hours. The power was completely out, making the streets black canyons between shadowy buildings. The few people I saw were hurrying with flashlights, carrying bags, clearly fleeing. I passed several accidents where cars had collided in the darkness, some abandoned, others with dazed occupants still trying to figure out what to do. The blue-green glow pulsed on the horizon behind me, but now I saw other, similar glows in different directions. Multiple landing sites, just as Dr. Vega had said. I was about halfway home when I saw them for the first time. At first, I thought they were people crossing the road ahead, tall, slender figures moving with unusual grace. Then my headlights caught them fully, and my blood ran cold. They weren't human. Their bodies were wrong, too elongated, jointed in impossible ways. Their skin, if you could call it that, had a metallic sheen that reflected my headlights in prismatic patterns. And their faces smooth, featureless ovals with no discernible eyes, nose, or mouth, yet somehow giving the impression of watching, analyzing. There were 3 of them, and they turned toward my approaching vehicle with synchronized precision. I had a split-second decision to make: stop, reverse, or continue forward. Instinct took over, and I floored the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, but the creatures didn't scatter as humans would. 2 leapt with impossible agility, clearing my vehicle entirely. The third stood its ground, extending an arm that elongated like liquid metal. The impact was jarring, but not what I expected. Instead of hitting solid mass, it felt more like driving through dense fog. The creature's form seemed to dissipate around the SUV, then reconstitute behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw all 3 entities regrouping, watching my retreat, but not pursuing. My hands shook on the steering wheel. What I'd just seen violated everything I understood about physical reality. These weren't just aliens from another planet. They were fundamentally different from any life form I could comprehend. I took side streets the rest of the way, avoiding main roads where the creatures might be concentrated. As I turned onto Maple Street, my headlights illuminated a scene of partial evacuation. Some houses were obviously abandoned, front doors left open. Others showed signs of hasty departure, with cars missing from driveways. A few homes still had flashlights or candles visible in windows, people who were either unaware of what was happening or had chosen to shelter in place. My modest 2-story home was dark. Kelly's boyfriend's car wasn't in the driveway, which could be good or bad. Either they'd evacuated together, or she was alone. I pulled into the garage and closed the door behind me, using the manual release since the power was out. The house was silent as I entered through the kitchen, my flashlight beam cutting through familiar spaces now rendered strange by darkness and fear. "Kelly," I called out, keeping my voice low. "It's Dad. Are you here?" No answer. I moved through the first floor methodically, checking each room, finding no signs of struggle, but also no indication of where she might have gone. Her room upstairs was similarly untouched, bed made, everything in its place. I was checking the bathroom when I heard it, a faint sound from below, from the basement. Something being moved, then silence. Our basement had been my project over the years, gradually transformed from unfinished storage space to a comfortable family room, laundry area, and my home workshop where I sometimes handled small locksmithing jobs. More importantly, it had only small window wells for entry, making it the most secure part of the house. I descended the stairs slowly, flashlight beam preceding me. "Kelly, it's Dad. If you're down here, it's okay." A shuffle came from behind my workbench, then a whispered voice. "Dad." Relief washed over me as Kelly emerged from the shadows, followed by her boyfriend, Tyler. They both looked exhausted and terrified. "Thank God," I said, embracing her tightly. "Are you okay? Why didn't you answer when I called?" "We weren't sure it was you," Tyler explained, still looking warily at the stairs. "The power went out around 3 a.m., and then we started seeing weird lights outside. Kelly got a text from her friend Lisa about strange creatures downtown, but then the cell networks went down. We tried calling you," Kelly added, her voice trembling slightly, "but couldn't get through. Then people started evacuating the neighborhood. The Harises next door said military trucks were picking people up on Main Street, but then we heard explosions, and—" She trailed off, clearly overwhelmed. "So you decided to hide in the basement," I finished for her. She nodded. "It seemed safer than going outside when we didn't know what was happening." Tyler blocked the window wells with the storage shelves. I quickly shared what I knew, giving them a condensed version of what Dr. Vega had told me and my encounter on the way home. Their expressions shifted from disbelief to horror as I spoke. "Actual aliens?" Tyler whispered. "Like invading?" "Yes," I replied simply. "And from what I've seen and heard, they're eliminating resistance and taking control of infrastructure. The military response has been ineffective." "What do we do?" Kelly asked, the question hanging heavy in the basement air. I considered our options. The research facility's fallback location was the surest bet for safety, but getting there meant traveling across potentially dangerous territory. Staying put might work temporarily, but for how long? If the invasion continued expanding, nowhere in town would be safe. My professional instincts took over. As a locksmith, my job was always about security, about keeping people and valuables safe behind the strongest barriers possible. Right now, we needed to secure our position while gathering more information. First, we fortify this house, I decided. The basement is our fallback position if we need to hide. Tyler, help me bring down water, food, medical supplies, anything we might need for several days. Shouldn't we try to leave town? Kelly asked. Get away from where they're landing? Not blindly, not without knowing where's safe, I replied. Dr. Vega gave me coordinates to a secure facility, but we need to be smart about when and how to move. Let me check the satellite phone she gave me, see if I can get any updates. The phone connected after several tense moments, but the voice that answered was unfamiliar, terse, and distracted. They confirmed that alien forces were now in all major cities globally, with smaller towns and rural areas being systematically targeted. The military was in disarray, with conventional weapons proving largely ineffective. The person couldn't or wouldn't tell me if the fallback facility was still secure, but provided frequencies for emergency broadcasts. After disconnecting, I turned the small radio from my emergency kit to the suggested frequency. Through bursts of static, we heard a military announcer providing tactical updates and instructions for civilians. Avoid open areas and major roadways. These entities appear to be targeting population centers and infrastructure. They demonstrate advanced technology, including energy weapons and some form of matter manipulation. Conventional firearms have limited effect. All civilians should shelter in secure locations away from windows. If you encounter these entities, do not attempt communication or resistance. Tyler and Kelly exchanged terrified glances. So we're just supposed to hide and hope they don't find us? Tyler asked. I shook my head. We prepare, we stay informed, and we make decisions based on the best information available. Right now, that means fortifying our position here while monitoring the situation. We spent the next hour preparing the basement as a secure shelter, bringing down supplies and creating makeshift barriers for the small windows. I set up my workbench as a monitoring station, with the radio and satellite phone positioned for best reception. Around 6 a.m., we heard vehicles on our street, heavy engines, military from the sound of it. I cautiously went upstairs and peeked through the front blinds. 3 armored personnel carriers were moving slowly down Maple Street, accompanied by soldiers on foot. They were going door to door, evacuating civilians. "We should let them know we're here," Kelly said, having followed me upstairs. Something didn't feel right. The soldiers' movements seemed too stiff, too synchronized. Their faces, visible under helmet-mounted lights, showed no expression, no human variation in their actions. "Wait," I said, holding her back from the door. "Something's wrong." As I watched, a woman from across the street ran out to the soldiers, clearly relieved to see them. She approached the nearest one, saying something I couldn't hear. Without hesitation, the soldier raised his weapon and fired. Not a gunshot, but a pulse of blue-green energy that enveloped the woman. She didn't fall or bleed. Instead, her form seemed to shimmer and then collapse in on itself, leaving nothing behind. "Those aren't soldiers," I whispered, pulling Kelly away from the window. "They're the aliens disguised somehow." We retreated to the basement, where I explained what I'd seen to Tyler. His face went pale. "They can look like us," he asked. "How do we know who's human?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to be extremely careful now. No answering the door, no signaling our presence, no matter who or what we see outside." The radio brought more disturbing news throughout the morning. The aliens had infiltrated military and emergency services in multiple locations, using their ability to mimic human appearance to devastating effect. Trust had become as dangerous as the energy weapons they wielded. Around 9 a.m., a new development. Reports that the aliens couldn't maintain their human disguises indefinitely. Under stress or when using their energy weapons, their true forms would briefly become visible. Small resistance groups were using this knowledge to identify and avoid the imposters. We took turns watching the street from the second-floor windows, keeping well back from a glass. The false military units had moved on, but occasionally we saw other figures walking with that too-perfect precision that now seemed obviously inhuman. Some still wore human appearances, others had abandoned the pretense, their elongated forms moving openly through the once familiar neighborhood. By 10 a.m., a new pattern emerged. The aliens began systematically entering homes, moving from house to house down the street. Not breaking in, but somehow bypassing locks entirely, their forms seemingly able to partially dematerialize and flow through small openings. "They'll reach us soon," Tyler whispered, watching from the upstairs bathroom window as the creatures entered the house 3 doors down. My mind raced, professional knowledge colliding with desperate circumstances. I'd spent my career understanding how to secure spaces, how locks and mechanisms work to keep barriers intact. These beings could apparently circumvent physical security by altering their very form, but there might still be ways to detect or deter them. "The basement workshop," I said suddenly. "Help me gather some materials." Using components from my locksmithing supplies, pressure sensors, magnetic contacts, small alarms typically used in security systems, I quickly assembled makeshift intrusion detectors for every potential entry point in the house. They wouldn't stop the aliens, but they would alert us to their presence. "What about the vents, the plumbing?" Kelly asked. "If they can flow through gaps." "Good thinking," I replied, improvising smaller sensors for air returns and drain openings using materials from my electronic lock repair kit. With our early warning system in place, we retreated to the basement to wait. I'd brought down my toolbox, continuing to modify and improve our defenses while Tyler monitored the radio, and Kelly kept watch on the street through a small gap in the covered window well. "They're getting closer," she reported around 11:30 a.m. "The Robertson house is next, then ours." I checked our preparations one last time. The basement had only one entrance, the stairs, which we'd rigged with multiple sensors. We'd created a final fallback position behind my heavy steel workbench, reinforced with a household safe I'd bolted to the floor years ago. Not impenetrable, certainly, but the best we could manage with available materials. At 11:43 a.m., the first sensor triggered, a soft buzz from the device monitoring the back door. We froze, listening intently. No sound of breaking glass or forced entry, just the sensor's gentle warning that something had crossed its threshold. One by one, the interior sensors activated as the intruder moved through the house. Kitchen, living room, hallway, master bedroom, Kelly's room. Each space methodically investigated by an entity that made almost no sound, tripping our sensors with its mere presence. Finally, the basement door sensor activated. Heavy silence filled our concrete sanctuary as we pressed ourselves into our reinforced corner. I held a finger to my lips, though the gesture was unnecessary. None of us dared breathe. Footsteps on the stairs, too evenly spaced to be human. A tall figure emerged from the stairwell, still wearing the appearance of a soldier, but with telltale wrongness in its proportions and movements. Its head turned, scanning the basement with mechanical precision. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed to look directly at our hiding place. Then, without warning, all our electronic sensors triggered simultaneously, emitting a cacophony of buzzes and beeps. The creature reacted instantly, its human disguise falling away like water, revealing the metallic, elongated form beneath. In the chaos of noise and movement, I saw my opportunity. Reaching to the workbench, I triggered the final device I'd prepared, a makeshift electromagnetic pulse generator created from components in my electronic lock repair kit. Not powerful enough to damage the creature, perhaps, but the burst of energy might disrupt whatever technology it used to maintain its form or communicate. The effect was dramatic and unexpected. The alien convulsed as the pulse hit it, its form destabilizing further, rippling like mercury. It emitted a high-pitched sound that made my teeth ache, then retreated up the stairs with unnatural speed, abandoning its methodical search. We remained frozen in place for several minutes, hardly daring to believe our improvised defense had worked. Finally, Tyler whispered, "Is it gone?" "I think so," I replied, cautiously checking a small mirror I positioned to see up the stairwell. "But I don't know for how long, or if it will return with others." Kelly was looking at me with new understanding. "The pulse thing, you made that from your locksmith tools?" I nodded. Electronic locks operate on relatively simple electromagnetic principles. I just reconfigured some components to generate a stronger field than normal. Looking at the device, now burnt out from the single use, I added, "I could make more, but we're limited by what I have in my kit." The radio crackled with a new emergency broadcast, this one more urgent than previous announcements. "Attention, all human survivors. We have confirmed that the invading entities are vulnerable to focused electromagnetic pulses." Repeating, the entities are vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses. Military units are deploying EMP weapons, but civilians can create localized effects using modified electrical equipment. Technical instructions follow. As the broadcast provided specifications, I recognized elements of what I'd accidentally discovered. My years working with electronic security systems had given me an intuitive understanding that led to an effective countermeasure. "We need to share this," I said, reaching for the satellite phone Dr. Vega had given me. "The research facility should know about this vulnerability." The call connected after several attempts. I quickly explained what we discovered and our successful repulsion of the alien intruder. The person on the other end sounded cautiously optimistic, confirming they were receiving similar reports from other locations and were working to develop more powerful EMP weapons. "The fallback facility is still secure," they informed me. "If you can make it here, we're gathering people with technical expertise to help develop countermeasures." I looked at Kelly and Tyler, considering our options. Staying put had worked so far, but for how long? The aliens would adapt, perhaps developing protection against electromagnetic pulses. The fallback facility offered better security and the chance to contribute to the resistance effort. "We'll try to reach you," I decided, "but we need to know the safest route and time to travel." The person provided coordinates for a pickup point 10 miles outside town, where regular transports were collecting survivors. The best window for movement would be during the upcoming shift change they'd observed in the alien forces, around 2:30 p.m. After ending the call, I shared the plan with Kelly and Tyler. "We have about 2 hours to prepare. We'll gather supplies, create more of these pulse devices, and be ready to move fast when the time comes. Using parts from every electronic device, we could dismantle phones, tablets, the microwave, even Kelly's electric toothbrush. I constructed 3 more electromagnetic pulse generators of varying strengths. We packed backpacks with water, food, first aid supplies, and extra components that might prove useful. The next challenge was transportation. My SUV was still in the garage, but driving would make us visible and vulnerable on open roads. After consulting the satellite maps on the phone, we identified a route that maximized cover and minimized exposure, service roads, a dry creek bed, and finally a stretch of forest that would bring us near the pickup point. At 2:15 p.m., we made our final preparations. The streets had been quietly ominous for the past hour, with no sign of the aliens but a palpable sense of their presence nearby. Through our makeshift observation points, we'd seen distant flashes of energy weapons and heard occasional explosions from the direction of downtown. Remember, I instructed as we prepared to leave through the back door. Stay low, move quickly but quietly. And if we encounter them, I'll use the pulse device. It won't stop them permanently, but it should disorient them long enough for us to escape. The moment we stepped outside, the alien presence felt overwhelming. The air itself seemed charged with an unnatural energy, and that blue-green glow now permeated the sky in all directions. We moved from yard to yard, using fences and hedges for cover, making our way toward the service road that would lead us out of the residential area. We'd covered about half a mile when we encountered the first alien patrol, 3 entities in their natural forms, moving in a triangular formation down the street we needed to cross. We crouched behind a parked car, hardly daring to breathe as they passed. The creek bed beyond the neighborhood provided better cover, its dry channel cutting through the landscape like a ready-made escape route. We moved faster now, putting distance between ourselves and the areas of heaviest alien activity. We were approaching the edge of town when disaster struck. A low-flying craft, similar to a helicopter, but silent and glowing with that same blue-green light, spotted us from above. It emitted a pulsing beam that swept the ground as it circled back toward our position. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. We sprinted toward the tree line 200 yards ahead, the only cover available in the open terrain. The craft descended rapidly, positioning itself between us and the forest. From its underside, a hatch opened, and 2 of the alien entities dropped to the ground with impossible grace, immediately advancing toward us. I pulled out our strongest pulse device, calculating the optimal moment to trigger it. Too soon, and they might recover before we reach the trees. Too late, and we might not get the chance at all. The aliens moved with that fluid, unsettling grace, covering ground quickly despite appearing to almost glide rather than run. As they closed to within 50 yards, I made my decision. Get ready to run past them when they're disoriented, I instructed Kelly and Tyler. Then I activated the device. The electromagnetic pulse expanded outward in an invisible wave. When it reached the aliens, the effect was immediate and more dramatic than in our basement. Both entities seemed to shatter like glass, their forms collapsing into shimmering puddles of metallic liquid. Above us, the craft lurched sideways, its lights flickering and propulsion system failing. "Now," I shouted, and we ran forward, giving the incapacitated aliens a wide berth. The craft was descending uncontrollably, its systems apparently disrupted by the pulse. We reached the tree line just as it crashed behind us, the impact sending a shock wave that knocked us forward onto the forest floor. Scrambling up, we continued running, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the crash site before stopping to catch our breath. "It worked," Tyler gasped, hands on his knees. "Like really worked." "Better than I expected," I admitted, studying the now-fried pulse device. "That was our strongest one, though. The others might not have the same effect." Kelly checked the satellite phone, confirming our position relative to the pickup coordinates. "We're still about 4 miles out. We should keep moving." The forest provided good cover as we continued our journey, though the uneven terrain and dense undergrowth slowed our pace. Occasionally, we spotted alien craft in the distance, searching patterns evident in their movements, but none came as close as the one we disabled. It was nearly 2:30, the projected shift change in alien activities, when we heard human voices ahead. Approaching cautiously, we discovered a camouflage checkpoint where armed personnel were directing survivors toward waiting transport vehicles. A tense moment of verification followed, the soldiers clearly wary of potential alien infiltrators. They had developed a simple but effective test. Each person had to place their hand on a device that emitted a small electromagnetic pulse. Humans felt nothing, while disguised aliens would involuntarily reveal their true nature. After passing this test, we were quickly loaded onto a rugged transport vehicle with other survivors, a mix of civilians and military personnel, all shell-shocked but alive. As we pulled away, heading toward the mountains where the fallback facility was located, I stared back at Greenfield. Columns of smoke rose from the town I'd called home for decades. The alien craft now hovered openly above it, their purpose still mysterious, but their impact devastating. A military officer moved through the transport, debriefing survivors and collecting useful information. When I explained my accidental discovery about the electromagnetic pulse effect and showed him the remaining devices I'd created, his expression shifted from polite interest to focused attention. "You built these from locksmithing equipment?" he asked, examining one of the pulse generators. "And household electronics," I confirmed. "The principle is similar to the electronics in high-security locks, just repurposed." He made notes, then moved on to speak with the driver over the radio. A few minutes later, he returned. "Mr. Reed, when we reach the facility, you'll be directed to the technical development section. Your expertise with electronic security systems and your practical application of the EMP vulnerability could be extremely valuable." Kelly squeezed my hand. "See, Dad? Being a locksmith is saving the world." I managed to smile, though the weight of the day's events made it difficult. In just 12 hours, our entire civilization had been upended. Yet somehow, the skills I'd spent decades perfecting understanding mechanical systems, electronic security, the fundamental principles of keeping things secure or breaking that security when needed, had become unexpectedly relevant to humanity's survival. As our transport climbed into the mountains, leaving the alien-occupied lowlands behind, I reflected on the strange twist of fate. I'd always seen my profession as practical, necessary, but hardly world-changing. Now, that specialized knowledge might help develop defenses against an incomprehensible threat. The fallback facility came into view as we rounded a mountain curve, a massive installation built into the mountainside, partially concealed by natural features and camouflage netting. Military vehicles and personnel created a protective perimeter with obvious preparations for defense. We passed through multiple checkpoints, each with increasingly sophisticated verification procedures to ensure no alien infiltrators gained access. Finally, we were admitted to the main facility, an underground complex bustling with organized activity as military, scientific, and civilian personnel worked to understand and counter the invasion. Dr. Vega found us in the processing area, clearly relieved to see that we'd made it. "Mr. Reed, I'm glad you survived. When I heard about your discovery with the electromagnetic pulse effect, I knew you'd be an asset here." "I just got lucky," I admitted. "My equipment happened to have the right components." "Luck favors the prepared mind," she replied. "And yours was prepared by decades of understanding security systems." She turned to Kelly and Tyler. "We'll find quarters for you all. There's work for everyone here: medical support, logistics, communications." This facility was designed to be self-sustaining for months if necessary. As Dr. Vega led us deeper into the complex, I asked the question that had been haunting me since the first alien appeared in my basement. What do they want? Why are they here? She paused, considering how much to share. "We're still determining that. Initial analysis suggests resource acquisition, but their methods are peculiar. They seem to be cataloging as much as conquering, taking samples of everything: infrastructure, technology, even people in some cases." She shook her head. "Whatever their purpose, they clearly consider us an acceptable loss in achieving it." We reached a large chamber that had been converted into a research lab. engineers and scientists worked on various devices, many of which appeared to be weaponized versions of the pulse generators I'd created in my basement. "This is where you'll be working," Dr. Vega explained, leading me to a workstation where my remaining devices had already been placed. "Our engineers need your practical expertise to refine these designs for mass production and deployment." Kelly looked at me with pride and fear in equal measure. "So you're officially part of the resistance now." "We all are," I replied, scanning the busy facility around us. "Every person here has a role to play." An engineer approached, introducing himself as Dr. Catry. "Mr. Reed, your improvised EMP devices are quite ingenious. The way you've configured the capacitor discharge is particularly effective against their molecular cohesion. We'd like you to walk us through exactly how you built them." For the next hour, I explained the components and principles I'd used, drawing diagrams and answering technical questions. What had been intuitive tinkering, for me, became the foundation for more sophisticated weapons when combined with the facility's resources and expertise. During a brief break, I found Kelly and Tyler in the common area where they had been assigned temporary duties, Kelly helping in the medical section thanks to her first aid training, Tyler assisting with inventory management. They had both been given a crash course on the facility's emergency protocols. "What happens next?" Tyler asked as we shared a quick meal of military rations. "Do we just hide in this mountain while they take over everything outside?" Dr. Vega, who had joined us, shook her head. "This is just the beginning. We're gathering information, developing countermeasures, establishing contact with other resistance facilities around the world. The EMPs work, but we need delivery systems, we need scale. And we need to understand them better," added Dr. Catry, setting his tray down next to mine. "Why the electromagnetic pulses affect them so dramatically. Their physical composition seems to involve some kind of programmable matter, solid yet capable of reconfiguration. The pulses disrupt whatever field maintains that cohesion." A lieutenant approached our table with a tablet. "Dr. Vega, we're receiving the first satellite imagery since the initial attacks. You should see this." The images on the screen were chilling. Major cities worldwide surrounded by massive alien structures that hadn't been there that morning. Not just landing craft, but what appeared to be processing facilities, their purpose unknown, but their scale immense. "They're establishing permanence," Dr. Vega said quietly. "This isn't a raid. It's colonization." The reality of our situation settled over the table like a physical weight. This wasn't going to end today or tomorrow or perhaps for a very long time. The battle that began 12 hours ago would likely continue for months or years. As we absorbed this grim assessment, an alarm sounded, not the frantic warning of an attack, but a measured alert calling key personnel to the command center. Dr. Vega and Dr. Catry immediately stood. "Mr. Reed, please come with us," Dr. Vega requested. "Your practical experience might be valuable." In the command center, military officers and scientific personnel gathered around displays showing a topographical map of the surrounding mountains, with multiple red indicators converging on our location. "They found us," the facility commander, General Hartwick, stated without preamble. "Multiple craft approaching from different vectors. ETA 20 minutes. "How?" someone asked. "This facility is shielded, camouflaged." "They followed the transport vehicles," an intelligence officer replied. "Despite our counter-tracking measures, they've developed some method of tracing energy signatures over distance." General Hartwick turned to the assembled experts. Options. Various tactical suggestions filled the room, deploying the prototype EMP cannons, evacuating to secondary locations, using the mountain itself as a shield. I listened, understanding the principles, but not the military logistics. Then I noticed something on the display that triggered my professional instinct. "The ventilation system," I said, loud enough to cut through the debate. "If they can track energy signatures and alter their physical form, the external air vents are vulnerable." The room fell silent as they considered this. The facility's security expert nodded slowly. "He's right. The vents have physical barriers and filtration systems, but nothing that would stop entities that can partially dematerialize." Can we seal them? General Hartwick asked. Not without suffocating everyone inside within hours, the engineer replied. But we could. He looked at me speculatively. We could adapt Mr. Reed's EMP devices to create barriers at each intake point. Dr. Catry immediately grasped the concept. Continuous low-level pulse fields at every potential entry. It wouldn't stop a determined assault, but it would prevent infiltration through small openings. General Hartwick made the decision instantly. Make it happen. Meanwhile, we deploy our prototype weapons to engage their craft directly. The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. Using the facility's fabrication equipment, we modified my original designs to create sustained electromagnetic field generators. Maintenance teams installed them at every ventilation intake, utility conduit, and potential access point around the mountain facility's perimeter. I found myself working alongside engineers and security specialists, my practical knowledge of entry points and barriers complementing their theoretical expertise. In those frantic minutes, the distinctions between military, scientific, and civilian personnel disappeared. We were simply humans fighting for survival. When the alien craft arrived, our preparations faced their first real test. On the command center displays, we watched as sleek, elongated vessels circled the mountain, scanning with those same blue-green beams I'd seen above Greenfield. The first attack came not as an explosive bombardment, but as an infiltration attempt exactly as I'd predicted. Sensors showed multiple entities attempting to enter through the ventilation system, only to be disrupted by our pulse fields. They're probing, General Hartwick observed, testing our defenses. The tactical officer nodded. And now they'll try a direct approach. He was right. The craft repositioned, focusing their energy weapons on the main entrance to the facility. The reinforced doors held against the initial barrage, but sensors showed the material degrading with each hit. Deploy the prototypes, General Hartwick ordered. On the mountainside, concealed ports opened to reveal hastily constructed EMP cannons, larger, more powerful versions of my improvised devices. They fired in coordinated sequence, sending electromagnetic pulses toward the attacking craft. The effect was dramatic. Two of the vessels immediately lost cohesion, their sleek forms destabilizing into amorphous masses that crashed into the mountainside. The others retreated to a higher altitude, apparently reassessing their approach. A cheer went up in the command center, quickly tempered by the tactical officer's assessment. They'll adapt. Next time, they'll have countermeasures. Then we'll adapt too, General Hartwick replied. He turned to address the room. This was the first test, and we passed. But this is just beginning. They'll be back with new tactics, new technology. We need to stay ahead of them. As the immediate threat subsided, I found Kelly and Tyler in the common area where evacuees had gathered during the attack. Kelly rushed to embrace me. They're saying you helped save the facility, she said. That you figured out how they would try to get in. I shook my head. I just applied what I know about securing entry points. Nothing special. That's not what the military guys are saying, Tyler commented. They're calling you the Locksmith who outsmarted the aliens. The nickname made me uncomfortable, but I understood the human need for hope, for heroes in desperate times. If my contribution had helped, that was enough. Dr. Vega found us as the facility returned to normal operations. The general wants to integrate you formally into the security team, she told me. Your perspective on access points and barriers provides insights the military planners might miss. I glanced at Kelly, silently asking her opinion. She nodded encouragingly. I'll help however I can, I told Dr. Vega. It's what I've always done, just on a slightly larger scale now. As evening approached, marking 12 hours since the invasion began, I stood in the facility's observation room, looking out at the darkening sky through reinforced windows. The alien vessels had withdrawn beyond visual range, but we knew they were still out there, regrouping, planning their next move. Kelly and Tyler joined me, the three of us silently watching as the first stars became visible above the mountain peaks. Somewhere up there, beyond our atmosphere, more of the invaders might be arriving or perhaps communicating with those already here. What do you think happens tomorrow? Kelly asked softly. We keep fighting, I replied. We learn from today, adapt our defenses, find new weaknesses they might have. It's a lot like security work, actually. It's always evolving, always a balance between protection and vulnerability. Except instead of protecting houses and businesses, you're helping protect the entire human race, Tyler observed. I allowed myself a small smile at the absurdity of it all. 24 hours ago, I'd been sleeping peacefully, my biggest concern being a backed-up schedule of routine lock installations. Now I was part of humanity's resistance against an alien invasion, my specialized knowledge unexpectedly relevant to our survival. Dr. Catry entered the observation room, tablet in hand. Mr. Reed, we've been analyzing the alien technology recovered from the crashed vessels. There's something you should see. On his tablet, he showed me images of what appeared to be locking mechanisms, intricate systems of interlocking components unlike anything I'd ever seen, yet recognizably designed to control access and secure openings. They use security systems too, I murmured, fascinated despite the circumstances. Different technology, but the same fundamental purpose. Exactly, Dr. Catry replied. And if we can understand how their systems work, we might find more vulnerabilities. I finished, professional interest, fully engaged now. Every lock can be picked if you understand its mechanism. As night fully descended, the facility shifted to its overnight operation mode. Kelly and Tyler were shown to quarters where they could rest, while I remained with the engineering team, examining the alien technology and helping refine our defensive systems. In those quiet hours of focused work, surrounded by the brightest minds our species could offer, I found an unexpected sense of purpose. The world had changed irrevocably in just 12 hours, transformed from familiar routine to existential struggle. Yet somehow, the skills I'd spent a lifetime honing, understanding the fundamental principles of security, of keeping things in or out, of creating and defeating barriers, had become essential to our survival. The invasion that began at 2:34 that morning had brought devastation and terror, but also clarity. Every lock, every security system, every barrier I'd ever worked with had prepared me for this moment. Not just to survive, but to help others survive. To contribute something unique to humanity's defense. I'm Marcus Reed, a locksmith, and I survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion. But this is only the beginning of our story.